with regard to these mass shootings. As I said yesterday, using mass shootings as your gauge of gun control policy is actually a foolish idea because they're not representative of the broader whole. I'm not the only one saying that. 538 says that, okay? Nate Silver's site says that. Nate Silver is no right-winger on guns. And then, of course, you have the greatest of all political commentators of the left, Keith Olbermann. So he attacked me on Twitter this morning. I had said yesterday who made Jimmy Kimmel the moral arbiter. And Keith Olbermann tweeted, because whores like real Donald Trump, the GOP, and Ben Shapiro have sold their souls to the NRA and the death cult. Any other questions, kid? So a few things. Number one, is the suggestion that every single person in the United States who owns a gun and believes in gun rights is part of a death cult? Because I think that, again, death cults could be more properly attributed to people who think that Planned Parenthood is doing wonderful work in killing babies. But I actually did have some questions for Keith Olbermann that I tweeted back at him. Questions like, if you are so good at your job, why have you been fired from your last 3,297 jobs? Also, was it his expertise in shouting things like En Fuego that gave him the godlike ability to see into other people's souls? Was it that? And also, where did he get his glasses? Because those are actually kind of nice. And then also, is he just okay? Is he okay? Because he doesn't seem okay, Keith Olbermann. But this is the entire moral equation the left wants to set up, and I just find it despicable. I find it gross. Okay, so I'm going to talk about... So why is it that we pay so much attention to talking gun control in the aftermath of a mass shooting as opposed to, say, the normal murder rate? Well, there are a few reasons. One is the normal murder rate has been going down steadily for the last 20 years. So it's hard to make a case that we need gun control when the murder rate has been going like this, right? Murder rate per 100,000 is down. It is not up, in fact. The murder rate has been dropping steadily for years and years and years. And the statistics that you are seeing from places like Vox.com, they're ignoring this stat. Vox.com did put this stat up, but they buried it in one of their stories, this 7A. Look at this chart, okay? The chart that I'm about to show you is the rate of firearm homicide deaths in the United States in 1981 to 2010. You see how it's declined? You see how it completely dropped off? All right, so it's very hard to make a case that we need stronger gun control when the crime rate has been dropping off and the rate of firearm homicide death has been dropping off as well. Also, when you see a lot of statistics about the rise in firearm deaths, they are conflating two types of death. They're conflating suicide and homicide. So the number of firearm homicides in the United States has basically been stagnant for 15 years. The number of suicides, however, has risen. So here's the chart showing you that. The top line here is the number of firearm suicides. The bottom line is the number of firearm homicides. So when everybody talks about the number of people being killed with guns, a lot of those people are killing themselves, right? A lot of those people are murdering themselves. So to suggest that this is solely about the number of murders is just not correct. It's just not accurate. Now I want to show you one more chart, this one also from Vox.com. So this is the rate of firearm suicide after Australia's gun buyback program. So they use this as proof that getting rid of firearms can minimize suicide. So what they say is the buyback program begins in 1996, and you see that the suicide rates drop all the way to 2006. But I want you to see what they did here. Look at the period before this. Look at the period 1990 to 1996, or more accurately, 1987 to 1996. All you see from 1996 to 2006 is basically a continuing decline in trajectory. So this idea that the suicide rate in Australia was solely due to the gun confiscation is just not true. Again, everybody is trying to create these correlations and then suggest that taking guns away is causative, but it isn't. And if we're going to talk about suicide rates by country, we have to talk about where suicide rates are the highest. Not in the United States, in Japan. Okay, so here is a chart showing you which countries have really high suicide rates. So if you look at this chart, what you'll see is that the United States is way down there at the bottom at 10.1 suicides per 100,000 people. Here are countries that have higher suicide rates. You ready? Austria, Belgium, Canada, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Iceland, Japan. Right, the highest one, I guess, is still Hungary at 21. Japan has about 20. There are no guns in Japan. None. Okay, there were like 6 firearm-related deaths in Japan last year, but their suicide rate is nearly double what our suicide rate is. So the idea that getting rid of the guns definitely gets rid of the suicide is just not true. Again, no correlation there. Now, I'm not saying that more guns means less crime. I'm not saying that fewer guns means more crime. What I'm saying is that there is no clear correlation. There is no clear correlation. So I'm going to show you a couple more stats because I think that people need to understand this. So here's some stats courtesy of the Washington Examiner. So here is the first stat this stat comes from Mother Jones. Okay, so this stat shows you, this chart shows you the gun ownership versus gun deaths by state. So you see how there's a line, right? And this looks like a pretty smooth correlation, right? it looks like gun ownership versus gun deaths by state. The states with more guns have more gun deaths, right? Makes sense. We're there. Only one problem. Notice the language here. Gun deaths by state. Remember what I just said. There is a correlation in the United States between gun increase and suicide increase, but there is no correlation between gun increase and murder increase. So what you're seeing here is a reflection of the suicide increase. How do I know that? Because I'm going to show you right now what it looks like when you look at the firearms murder rate. Okay, not the suicide rate, the murder rate. Okay, this is a scatter plot of the states in the United States, their gun ownership rate versus their firearms murder rate from 2014. What you're seeing right now does not look like a straight line correlation. It doesn't look like any sort of correlation. It looks like a shotgun of data. It looks like there are some states, presumably the one that's way up there on the top is probably DC. But the idea here is that there are some states that have 60% gun ownership rate and very, very low rates of firearms murder. And there are some states with close to 0% gun ownership rate and low rates of firearms murder. There are some states right here in the middle that look a little bit higher. But, again, there's no correlation at all here. And to suggest that there is really incorrect. And then finally, I will show you one more chart, and that is from the FBI census-related materials, firearms murders per 100,000 residents. And here you see that the District of Columbia is far and away, the state that has the most firearm murder. Notice that the states that have the most firearm murder also have big cities in them. So except for New York, which has a pretty low firearms murder rate, every area in the United States, 60% of all murder in the United States happens in, I believe, the top 50 metro areas. Those tend to be Democrat areas. Those tend to be urban areas. Those are areas that are not what people think of when they think of murder rate with high gun ratios. When people think high murder rate, high guns, they think, the boonies in Texas. That's not where all the murder is happening. The reason I'm pointing all this out is because you're hearing a lot of bad data today. From 1993 to 2013, the number of guns per person rose from 0.94 in the United States to 1.45. Now, fewer people as a percentage of the population had guns. But that means that a lot of people like me are buying 2 guns, right? Or they're like you and they're buying 5 guns. But the number of firearms per person has risen, and the gun homicides have completely fallen off. The gun homicides have fallen dramatically. So it's important to have all of this information in your head as background before we start going through all of the various propaganda that's being put out by the left on this. Before I go through more year of talking about gun control that's led to this impasse.
Officials say this is the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. A phrase I guess they're getting used to because it was only 14 months.
Folks, there's no doubt about what the Second Amendment does say. But at what point does a person's right to bear arms start infringing on his neighbor's right to live safely and freely? And if you've ever caught yourself checking the exits while at a concert hall or a school assembly or a movie, just in case, you probably already are ready to have that conversation. You would think our leaders should be able to have it too.
Well, again, I think there's actually a pretty easy answer to when does my neighbor's right to bear arms impinge on my ability to live freely, and it's when he starts shooting at me. And that's pretty simple answer. I mean, that's like saying, when does your neighbor's right to own a sword impinge on your right not to be chopped? Well, when he starts trying to chop me. Again, I think there are arguments to be made about what sorts of, machine guns have been banned in the United States since 1986. I think that's reasonable. But, but this suggestion that we have not been having the conversation we have is just the left is angry because they've been losing, because they don't have any evidence to support their positions. It's just infused the entire culture. You can't even watch sports anymore without this routine. Rachel Nichols on ESPN. Again, ESPN should be staying out of this. But we remember back in 2012 when Bob Costas was doing halftime reports on the NFL, and he decided to inject his own politics. Now we've got Rachel Nichols doing this on gun control.
Officials say this is the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. A phrase I guess they're getting used to because it was only 14 months ago they were saying that about the shooting in Orlando. The Orlando shooting claimed more lives than Virginia Tech. Now this one claims more lives than what happened in Orlando. I don't know how we're going to solve the debate about guns in this country. I just know that while we're all arguing, the body counts keep going up. And more
so we have to stop arguing, you see. We have to stop arguing is what she's saying. And the only way to stop arguing is for us to agree with her. But weekend after weekend, you'll have mass numbers of people being shot in Chicago and no talk about national gun control. So why is it that they always do it with regard to mass shootings? Especially because mass shootings represent a tiny, tiny, minute percentage of the number of shootings every year in the United States. According to Mother Jones, right, you're seeing the stat that's floating around right now that's saying things like 355 mass shootings this year. Absolute crap. Absolute crap. The way that they're measuring that is if there's any incident where more than one person was shot, they're considering that a mass shooting. The way that Mother Jones measures it, and Mother Jones is a lefty magazine, but they're intellectually honest about this. The way they measure it is they measure any shooting that has 4 or more people who are killed, and also is not a gang shooting, and also is not domestic violence, and it's not robbery. So that's how you or I would tend to think of a mass shooting. This is why when you see these stats about hundreds of mass shootings, you're thinking, no, that's not right. Because what you're thinking about, what the media are saying, are two different things. With that said, the number of mass shootings every year in the United States is actually quite low. So in 2015, Mark Fullman of Mother Jones, he came up with 4. 4. Not 355, 4. In reality, in the year 2015, there were 46 deaths in mass shootings in 2015. How many federal homicides were there involving guns? Almost 13,000. So the number of mass shooting deaths in 2015 were 0.3% of all gun-related homicides in the United States. The same sort of